Biffle. This is Teaching Challenging Kids 101. The date is April 10th, 2012. So if you're watching on that day, you can text in your questions live. If you're not, well, I bet you wish you caught the program live. Amazing show for you tonight, my friends, on Switch. This is the seventh of our big seven. These are our techniques that we use for daily instruction. And I'm Chris Biffle. Here we go. Now let's look at the big picture. Here's the whole brain teaching overview. Notice that we have some daily instruction techniques, and we've covered in the last 6 or 7 weeks 6 of them. Tonight we will be talking about switch. Next week we will go on to the practice cards, the Guff counter, our year-long classroom management strategies, and then we'll go back to basic skills. There's always something amazing happening at wholebrainteaching.com. So, we'd love to have your questions or comments if you're watching us tonight, April 10th. But let's talk about, here are my two friends. It's Biffy Bluebird.
What if someone wants a copy of these slides for professional development credit?
And his brother Bobby Bluebird. Easy breezy. Details are at the end of the program. This is program 522. And yes, you can get professional development credit for watching these lively shows. Let's jump right into it. How do we start the involver? The teacher says, class. Students say yes. The teacher then says, I've counted you off in 1s and 2s. When I say switch, I want you all to say switch and reach up in the air like you're pulling down a giant switch. Then the teacher pauses and says switch. Here's what that looks like. Here's what's so great about our live video broadcast. So when I say switch, the kids say, uh-oh, switch, and pull down a giant switch. We like to have them moving because when they're moving, we know they're engaged. Let's go back to the screen. The teacher says, great, now when you're teaching each other, I want the 1s to teach with gestures and the 2s to mirror gestures. When I shout switch, you shout switch and change roles, teach, okay, and the 1s teach the 2s. It's as simple as that. Simple as that, my friends. So, you've got your 1s and you've got your 2s. The 1s teach the 2s. You shout switch, they shout switch, uh-oh, switch, and they pull down a giant switch. That way, you be sure that everyone is involved. Oh my goodness, here's Biffy Bluebird back again.
Why is switch important?
And Bobby Bluebird answers, switch gives all the students speaking and listening practice, and it provides multiple repetitions of complex lessons. Let's look at how that pattern would go in a classroom. Notice that the red box is for the teacher, the blue circle is the students. The teacher says class, the kids answer yes, and then you speak briefly for 15 to 45 seconds. Shorter the better, my friends, because short-term memory is well named. It is short-term memory. Clap twice and say teach. The kids say okay, and the 1s teach with gestures and the 2s mirror gestures. Let's stop right there. Kids will have a tendency, your energetic kids will have a tendency to use gestures, and your quieter kids won't use gestures, but we want everyone using gestures. We want the motor cortex involved. So if I'm talking with gestures, my partner is mirroring my gestures. Let's go back to that screen. Then, after the kids are taught a while, you say switch. See, I'm here on this red box. And the 2s teach, and the 1s mirror. Now you walk around the room checking comprehension. Then you say class and begin a new lesson or review the current lesson. The basics of switch are that simple. We're going to get even deeper into this amazing technique. Now, here is some variations. Let's say you've got an odd number of kids. If you have an odd number of students, make one group the 1-2-1. Or pair with a leftover student, or let the student teach herself or her shoe, or use sockless hand puppets. So, you've got one group of 3. You can do various things. You can have a 1-2-1 in that group, or you can have a kid teach himself with sockless hand puppets, or kids, for some reason, they love to teach their shoe. Shy, quiet kids, let them teach their shoe, or a fluffy animal that you bring. That's how you solve the problem of an odd number of students. Now, with complex lessons, when students are teaching each other difficult material, switch them back and forth several times. Walk around and check comprehension. Or stand up, sit down. The teaching student stands, the learning students sit. This is really a good one. When's the hardest time to teach? For most of us, it's late in the afternoon. The kids are tired. Tired means the blood is not in their brain. It's in their sit-down place. That's a polite way of saying that other thing. The blood is in their sit-down place. When a kid stands up, they have 15% more blood circulating in their brain. So we get them stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. The kids standing are teaching. The kids sitting, they're mirroring gestures. And you say switch, boom. You say switch, boom. Gets the blood flowing. When the blood's flowing, good things can happen in a classroom. Now here's a technique. Here's a technique developed by Jeff Battle in North Carolina. It's called the tag team. When a student finishes an explanation, she tags her listening partner with a high five, and the partner begins his explanation, switching without the switch. Pay attention. This is a good one. You've got a real complex lesson. Now the problem with switches is that a kid may not be finished talking when all of a sudden they're switched. Not finished talking, all of a sudden they switch. What you do is you say, all right, look, you teach your lesson. When you're finished teaching everything I said, you give your neighbor a high five. That's the tag team. So then your neighbor stands up and finishes the lesson. So tag team guarantees that each kid gets to go through the lesson as many times as you want the tag team to go on. Yes, Nancy, tag team is a very powerful technique. Let's look at some samples of where you would use switch. Here's a WBT lesson plan or template. Now, with this template, we have 5 steps. We ask a question and give a personal hook. That means tell some little interesting story about the question. So if it's about author, you tell about an author you met. Or if it's about fraction, you talk about eating a fraction of a pizza. Give an answer with a gesture. Now this whole 5-step lesson template we covered in a previous video. Then expand the answer with examples. When you're expanding that answer, that's a good place to use the switch. Then you're going to evaluate with yes, no, way, and QT. And I'll talk a little bit about those later. This is our assessment section. And then do some critical thinking. And in the critical thinking, which we'll also talk a little bit about, you can use switch. Now, if you have some questions, let me know. I'll be looking at the question box, but now here's a brand new kind of graphic that you've never seen before. Oh, look at that, my friends. You see that? Here's the teacher. Now notice across the top, here are the 5 steps in the 5-step lesson template. Question, answer, expand, evaluate, critical thinking. So we're going to act it out. We're going to act it out. The teacher says class, and the students say yes. Well, I wonder what happens next. Well, then the teacher poses a question. Today's question is, what is an author? And the teacher claps twice and says teach. So, I'm the teacher. My friends, the question for today is, what is an author? We're going to ask ourselves the question, what's an author? Teach! When you say that, the kids go, okay, and they turn to each other and they teach each other the question, what's an author? What's an author? What's an author? You get it. Now, we've done the question. We've got to call the kids back and we're going to call them back just like this. Call the kids back. We give them class again. They say yes, and now we're ready for the answer. An author writes the words of a book, story, or poem. You clap twice and say teach. We've given the answer. The kids clap twice, and they say okay, and they explain the answer over and over again. So notice, we have the question, we have the answer. We haven't done switch yet. Give me an ah. Now. We call them back, and we're ready to expand. Class? Yes, they say. And here we go. So you give some examples of authors. You clap twice and say teach. The kids talk to each other about these examples of authors. But as you're looking out, you can see some kids are talking and some kids aren't. And Budsley, for kindergartners, you can never give too many directions. Tell the kids what to do right before you transition into the teach okay. So if you're teaching K1, K2, you finish your lesson and say, all right, now here's what I want you to do. I want a full turn. I want the ones to teach. I want the twos to mirror the gestures. Teach. So right before you do the transition, tell them exactly what you want them to do. And don't be afraid to repeat. Because teaching, oh yeah, here it comes. Here it comes. You know what's happening. Here it comes. Teaching is repeating. There was the 3D effect. If it bugs you to repeat, teaching's not the job for you. Yeah. Maybe you should be a traffic cop, although traffic cops have to repeat too. Let's go back to our screen. Now, we're getting ready for the switch moment. The teacher says switch. The kids say, oh, switch. They pull down a giant switch, and they keep talking about author. That's where you get language development. That's where you pull in the quiet kids. That's where you get 100% student engagement. Call them back, and now we're ready for evaluation or assessment. You're going to use some oral tests, yes, no, way, and QT. Let's talk about our oral tests, my friends. So you ask some questions like, could an author write a poem? Yes, the kids say. When a man builds a house, is he an author? No way, the kids say. So you ask simple questions and you get core response for yes or no way on the topic. That tells you, should you go over it again? Are they real quick and everybody's on board? Or are you ready to go to the QT? The QT is the quick test. You're going to say QT for quick test. Cutie, they say cutie. They cover their eyes with their hands, and then you make some statements. If the answer to the statement is yes, it's thumbs up. Answer to the statement is no, it's thumbs down. Or they don't know, this means teach me again. So then you make some statements about an author. Margaret Mitchell is the author of Gone with the Wind, you might say, if your kindergartners are very, very literate. Yes, that's right. Or you make some other statements. An author always draws the pictures in a book. That's false. Now, that power of that QT is that you instantly see who's got it and who doesn't. If 90% of your class is not doing this correctly right after your lesson, reteach it. Don't go on to some other stuff. They didn't get what you just said. Let's look at that screen. Now, then you do some critical thinking. Now, what do we mean by critical thinking? We mean all different kinds of things. One good suggestion for critical thinking is have the kids write a letter to the aliens on Zork. You know, those Zorkians? They're very interested in what we Earthlings do. And they explain what an author is. They explain what a comma is. They explain what a noun is. That's a little more advanced, but it's very, very good for critical thinking. A little simpler might be, let's just use sentence frames. Now with the tag team, use the word author in a sentence as many times as you can. So a kid uses the word author in a sentence, tags another kid. That kid uses the word author in a sentence, tags another kid. So now, kids are doing critical thinking. Why do we call this critical thinking? because they're thinking up this stuff on their own. So we go to those open-ended tasks, and just having kids use the word you just taught them in a sentence is a very, very powerful way for them to link the new information to information that they may be familiar with from another broadcast, from another lesson, probably not a broadcast. All right, let's look at this. Now, here we are. Again, the two crucial places to use the switch to get maximum involvement is when you're expanding your lesson with details and when you're doing their critical thinking, when they're bouncing back and forth. Now, why should we use switch? Well, first point on the very left, the highest memory retention is in the motor cortex. The lowest memory retention is in Wernicke's area. Wernicke's area is where we process information we hear. So if we get the kids moving, when they're moving, they're using their motor cortex, the brain's most powerful area, and they're also using their visual cortex, watching the movements of others. And they're using their auditory cortex, and they're speaking. So that's what's going on with switch and the gestures. Whole brain teaching. Gosh, that's a clever, punchy name, isn't it? Whole brain teaching. Anybody ever hear of that? All right, now, chronic talkers learn listening skills. Chronic listeners learn speaking skills. That's a good point. English language learners have continuous opportunities for language development. When students speak using gestures or listening while mirroring gestures, teachers immediately see who's on task. And most importantly of all, switching with your neighbor is more stinking fun than listening to a teacher. And kids love to have fun. Let's let them have fun while they're on task. Now, leadership training. Here's a big point, my friends. Classroom leaders are the greatest underutilized resource we have in education. It's free. They're on site. They're ready to lead. Let's give them some stuff to do besides just hand out papers. Let's get them involved in the learning community. Lots of evidence shows kids learn best from other kids. They speak the same language. I'll take off. Kids learn best from other kids. Why? They speak the same language. They speak kid talk. Yeah, marvelous language. Putting the glasses back on. Now, let's look at how leaders would work with switch. You select the leaders to cue switch. You give the leaders examples of various tones of voice to use. When you point at a leader, they say switch, and students respond switch and pull down an imaginary switch. Couldn't be simpler. Now here's a summary. Count off your class in ones and twos. Speak briefly using gestures, clap twice and say teach. Students clap twice and say, okay, the ones teach the twos using gestures, or peanut butters teach the jellies. Twos mirror gestures. After the ones have repeated the lesson several times, shout switch. Students respond switch, and they pull down a giant switch. The twos then teach the ones. All right, my friends, if you have any questions, type them in. We still got a major chunk, an exciting chunk of the broadcast left. In fact, we're going to have a real big review. Yes, we're going to talk about it all. Any questions, type them in. Pay attention to the answers that come from the people with red names. They are our online gurus. And if it's April 10th, you're going to get some answers. If it's not, sorry folks, you missed the show. So let's review. This is the end of our 7 weeks of the Big 7. Let's look at each of these techniques. Class, yes. You say class, they say yes. Use variations. Change your pitch. Class, class. Change your speed. Say it one time, say it many times. Use gestures. And when the kids have got the hang of class yes, throw out some core knowledge instead of class yes. So you might say 4 times 4, and they say 16, and they're back with you. Or you know the addition facts they're having problems with. 7 plus 6, that's a real stinger. So you might say 7 plus 6, 13. Say 7 plus 6 all day long till they get 7 plus 6 is 13. And also, here's the weird part, 6 plus 7 is 13. Use the callback to re-emphasize the gnarly material. And you know what? That's a new idea. Just think about this, my friends. I'm talking right to you. Baltimore, Florida, Missouri, California, Arizona, I'm talking to you. You know what your kids are having problems with. Every single time, once they know the class yes, call out the question, get the answer back. 7 times 6 is 42. It's not 13. You know what I mean? Use that to really hone in on the gnarliest of the teaching material that you covered. Classes going back on. That's brand new. I would take a 10-finger woo for you. Now, that's the class yes. Here are the classroom management signs. Aren't they beautiful? Created by my wonderful daughter, Saskia Biffle. These 5 signs are available at wholebrainteaching.com. Cost you a whopping 99 cents each. And we have a cultural diversity, so each of these signs is also created to show someone that has a different skin color. So mix and match them, my friends. Whole brain teaching is just like America. We're all mixed up in wonderful ways. Now, here's the Teach OK. Teach OK is the 3rd technique. Let's go back. Let's see where we are. The big 7, first is our class yes, then is our scoreboard. Now we're up to 3, which is the Teach OK. The Teach OK is our fundamental teaching pattern. It's our think, pair, share, only jazzed up. We've heard more than one person say, whole brain teaching is direct instruction on steroids. Yes, that's what whole brain teaching is. All right, so here's the pattern. You say class, you're the red square. The kids say yes, you speak briefly, you clap twice and say teach, they say okay, and they teach each other, and then you go back and you start it over. The longer you talk, the more students you lose. Yes. All right, let's look at our next one. The scoreboard. We use the scoreboard instead of candy, instead of marbles in a jar, instead of script, instead of lottery tickets, instead of all the kind of junk that you've got in your treasure chest. Just put the scoreboard up there and set it up according to seasons or holidays. Points. You give smiley points for positive behavior, frowny points for negative behavior. Positive behavior, they're going to clap their hands and say, oh yeah. And the reward is 1 minute more or less of recess. It gets them every time. So this is the mighty groan. Now Farrah Shipley, she taught the world how to do the mighty groan. It isn't like this. No, she has her kindergarten doing this. Yeah, we don't have a second to lose. And the mighty oh yeah isn't like this. Oh yeah, it's like this. Oh yeah. So learn from those Texas kinders how to do this with a snap, a crackle, and a pop. Let's look at the next technique here. Well, hands and eyes. Hands and eyes is very, very simple. You start with class, they say yes, you say hands and eyes, they say hands and eyes, and then you speak briefly and make your big point. So, you're ready to teach and you have got a big, big point. You've got them back, you say hands and eyes. They say hands and eyes and they look at you. Or if it's a huge point, you say hands, hands, hands and eyes. And they love to do this. Hands, hands, hands and eyes. Then you make your big point. So hands and eyes introduces major material. Switch reviews anything that you've taught. Here is mirror. Mirror is one of our most popular techniques. There's 3 kinds of gestures to use with mirror. Casual, so you say mirror, watch me. You say mirror, they say mirror, and you just talk like this. You got an idea. It's really kind of interesting. They might want to just talk with your hands. That's one kind of mirror. Or you use your hands to tell a story. Now, there's 3 parts to this story. First, blah, 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 blah. Second, blah, 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 blah. And then third, you know what? The pigs went over the mountain. So use your gestures to describe a process, or here's the introduction, here's the body, here's the conclusion. So gestures can be casual, or they can be graphic, or they can be mirror. They can be memory gestures. You can link these gestures to state standards. Here's a gesture for fraction, numerator, denominator. Here's the gesture for author. An author writes the words of a book, story, or poem. Here's a gesture for multiplication. Here's a gesture for verb. A verb is an action word. So look at those 3 kinds of mirror gestures. Casual, here's casual, graphic, or memory gestures. Very, very powerful. And it gets kids intensely involved. Now, why should we use switch? Well, as we just mentioned, we want all our kids to learn speaking and listening skills. We want to develop the abilities of English language learners. And here's a point to stop right here. My friends, all our kids are English language learners. All right? They are. I'm still an English language learner. So let's not be setting kids apart and say, oh, there's the English language learners. No, they all got to learn English, and they all have to learn to use their whole brain. The problem with education is we're teaching them through the auditory cortex, which is the least efficient way to learn. You think you could learn tennis by listening to someone lecture about tennis? I don't think so. You got to do it to know it. Let's look at that screen. Here's the brain when you listen to lecture. You see that? The good kids are silent and they don't move, and they're using Wernicke's area, they're listening. So it's like the brain is atrophied as if a human being is nothing but an ear. That's what's happening in lecture. You got this complex person that can do all this stuff, and we're treating them as if they're just a giant ear. Au contraire, mon frère. Kids are more than ears. Is that so revolutionary? I think it is. But what happens to the brain on whole brain teaching? Well, boom, shakalaka. The motor cortex is involved, the prefrontal cortex, which makes decisions, Broca's area where they're speaking, Wernicke's area where they're listening. They're having fun and using their limbic system, the visual cortex they're seeing. So now the good kids are listening, seeing, moving, speaking, laughing. Here's what happens at whole brain teaching. Presto, we change the kids from ears into kids. Kids have all this wonderful energy and love to move and see and do and feel. And so we get to use their whole brain in instruction instead of trying to teach them with the auditory cortex, and that leaves the rest of the brain free for challenging behavior. Au contraire. We want to use the whole brain for learning and for sharing with each other. Well, here is my friend, Ms. Linenthal. Ms. Linenthal says, gosh, switch sounds great. Actually, this is how Ms. Linenthal talks. Gosh, switch sounds great, but how could I get professional development credit for this broadcast and a copy of these slides? Well, Ms. Linenthal, let me tell you. Go to wholebrainteaching.com, which I'm going to in a second. Click on PayPal and donate $5.22. 522 is the code number for this program. Before long, Sometimes within minutes, you'll get an email with a professional development certificate and a PDF copy of these slides. People have asked me, do you still have those professional development certificates with the blue borders? You know what, my friends? I still have a few left. There is that fancy certificate with the blue border. And guess what? There's the back side of it. So you just fill that out and turn it into your district. So let's look at the big picture here. Here's Whole Brain Teaching Education Reform Pyramid. Let's just talk about what a reform is. Now, if we had an education revolution, when a country has a revolution, it takes its old system of government, throws it out the window, and starts over from scratch. That's a revolution. So people say, oh, we're having an education revolution in this country. No, we're not. We didn't take the old system and throw it out the window. We're still using bits and pieces of that old system. But a reform means you take the old system and you reform it. You reshape it. How do you reform education? I've never talked about this online, I'll tell you. Conceptually, it's very simple. Education is just a series of relationships. Student to student, that's a primary educational relationship. Teacher to student, that's another primary educational relationship. You change the relationship between student and student. How? Make them teach each other. Get them using their whole brain. And between teacher and student, you change that relationship. How? The teacher speaks briefly. That changes the relationship and activates the student's whole brain. That changes the relationship. Another relationship in teaching is teacher and teacher. Well, yeah, we're reforming that. Teachers are getting together and figuring out gestures, figuring out how to do the teach okay, talking about the scoreboard. Another relationship is administrator and teacher. How do we change that? We say over and over and over again when we travel around the country, principals, you need to be lead teachers. Oh yeah, this is it. Principals, you need to be lead teachers. We don't need any more bean counters. We know we don't have very many beans. We don't need the beans counted anymore. Get in the classroom, roll up your sleeves, and do some teaching with us. That's what we need, lead teachers. Oh, glasses are going back on. So let's look at that education reform pyramid. At the bottom, we got all this free stuff. And here's the big 7. Class yes, the 5 rules, the scoreboard, the teach okay, mirror, hands and eyes, and switch. Notice the scoreboard is also part of the year-long classroom management system. Next week, my friends, practice cards right here. I'm going to see if I can highlight that. See that? Practice cards right there. We're going to talk about practice cards next week, which is so powerful, addressing individual behavior when kids are headed in the right direction and when kids are headed in the wrong direction. Practice cards will help them out. So many of you said, what does Teaching Heaven look like? I'll show you a picture of Teaching Heaven. There we are. That's the huge tower, the Whole Brain Teaching Tower. Notice that at the bottom are all these free videos and ebooks. And then the Big 7 and basic skills. And that leads us to Teaching Heaven. Yes, my friends. Well, let me show you on the website some of our basic resources. If you're interested in having a conference this summer or the next few months, I'm Chris Biffle. Our schedule's getting pretty full, but send me an email, chrisbiffle@wholebrainteaching.com. Join us on Facebook, but let's look at our website. Here we go. Now, the first thing you want to do is, when you want some basic information about whole brain teaching, go to the first steps. See, each of these is a short article about the Big 7. There's an article on Switch right there. After you do that, look at the levels. Here are the year-long classroom management levels, short articles. Then here's all of the stuff with our basic skills. Take a look at those. You want to see some videos? Click on the videos. If you want our free ebooks, you have to register. Big deal, you got to register. Click here, and then there's pages of free ebooks that we have for you. Let's adjust the screen so you can see all of them. The Whole Brain Teaching Construction Kit. Now they're listed in order of recentness. So here's all the new ones there. These are huge. These are PowerPoints. If you have a problem with PowerPoints, we are also going to put up some PDFs. This is just page 1 of our free ebooks. Here's Lesson Design and Delivery, one of our conferences, writing, and the list goes on page after page. Here's the next page. And on and on and on, page after page. You know what? If you have questions, just go to our forum. Here's the forum right up here. See that? Go to the forum and post questions on the forum. And if you want a copy of the slides, here's that PayPal button. Click and enter $5.22 and I'll send you the professional development certificate. Now here's a secret. Here's a secret, my friends. Right here, this is where you're watching right here. But you see this horizontal band of videos? There's only 4 showing. This little black arrow here, if you click that, you can see any of our earlier videos. Brain Toys, Super Speed, Mind Soccer, Prove It, 5-step lesson template that we talked about tonight, the Genius Ladder. So click that little black arrow. There's 20. We've been on the air for 20 weeks, my friends, and they're there ready for you. Ready for you for 24/7. Where's that PayPal button again? Someone asked. Well, it's right here. You see this? The PayPal button. It's up in the upper right corner of the home page. Right here. Now, my friends, if you have any questions, we'd love to have your questions now. We've still got a few minutes left. We've got a huge crowd tonight. Delighted to have you present. Oh, PowerPoint grammar is fantastic. You know, if I was just going to tell you to look at one new thing, I would suggest you look at the Super Improvers Wall. It's simple to implement, and it's had an incredible effect on hundreds and hundreds of kids. It's brand new. What it does is it gets every kid to work towards improving. On what? On anything you want. Social skills, reading, writing, math, lining up. The Super Improvers Wall. How could you find out about the Super Improvers Wall? Go here to the screen and let's just look at the broadcast, and if you scroll through the broadcast, you will find a Super Improvers Wall. Let's see if we can scroll through. I'm going to go to the big screen view. Here's the big screen view. You can see a few more of the broadcasts here. I'm going to scroll over here and see if we find the Super Improvers Wall. Super Improvers Program 503. Take a look at that. Also, the Genius Ladder. Genius Ladder, very, very simple way every day to increase kids' language skills. So my friends, if you have any questions, let me know. If not, we will see you next week. Next week we're talking about practice cards, my friends. Practice cards. Oh, you don't want to miss that. Scoreboard is for the class as a whole. Practice cards is for adjusting individual behavior. All right, my dear friends. We love talking to you every week. This is a joyful thing that we do. And so we are signing out. Oh, let's do this. We always do this. It's fun. Type in where you're from. What city and state are you from? Let's just see those cities and states just flow right now. Orange, California. Albuquerque. North Dakota. Little Rock. Lebanon. You mean Lebanon, Lebanon? Florida, New Hampshire, Fort Lauderdale, New Jersey, Baltimore, Quartz Hill, Woodbridge. Brazil? I can't believe Brazil. Lubbock, Texas, Mesa, Arizona, San Diego, Melbourne, Australia. Oh my goodness, my friends. Brazil, Lebanon, and Melbourne, Australia. We're international, but we've always known that. Well, I'll stay on a few more minutes here for Melbourne, Australia, and Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Lebanon, and Little Rock. Orlando. I'll be in Orlando. Hey, pay attention. My friends, we actually have online a date for a couple of conferences. You know, we were a little slow getting these dates up this year. Let's look at them. I will be guaranteed in Kansas on the 30th of April. There it is. Come here and register with Brian Huffman. Love to see you in Wichita, Kansas. And now, my friends, announcing, yeah, here's the announcement. The National Convention. It's posted. We still have a few glitches in the registration process, but by tomorrow the registration process ought to be finished. Let's look at the screen for the National Convention. Here it is. It's huge. You see that? 3 days with so many of the whole brain teaching superstars. And they've all got their street names. Andrea Little Rocket Schindler, Farrah Lubbock Lightning Shipley. Farrah's online tonight. Deb Thunderbirdie Weigel. Chris the Big Smooth Rexted. Angela DJ Red Macias. And Jeff Carolina Cool. I might even show up myself. That sounds so good. Let's see where you can get information about Here's where you get information, right here, the 5th Annual Whole Brain Teaching K-12 National Convention. It's in Louisiana. All right, my friends, we will sign off now. Yes, Kamira. Kamira, where are you from? I'd love to have an international conference. I was just in Maryland. All right, here's what we say. God bless us all, and power to the teachers. It's Coach B signing off until next week. We'll talk about practice cards. Thank you so much, my friends. Stay online and chat with each other.